Hey friends, thanks for joining me, and maybe with a little bit of redundancy. I hope this video finds everybody doing well and in good spirits. And once again, I'm going to get right into it. Recently watched another video from XJW Elder's wife Jane Doe where she's tackling the topic of Tartarus as it's written in 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 4, and she's using a Watchtower article that's very lengthy, and it's pretty obvious that Watchtower doesn't really have a clue because they got to really dance around the entire subject to try to give any sense of meaning to 2 Peter 2:4. And she also reads from Wikipedia, and it's pretty apparent that those people that are writing there really can't qualify what Tartarus truly is. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a little bit to that, because listening to what Watchtower was writing in that article gave me some thoughts that I would like to add to or convey at this time. There again, if you've done any research into the Bible, how it has come down to us, what some of the scholars say about some of the writers, what I'm about to read to you should be of no shock. I'm going to be reading just a little bit from the New Testament by Stephen L. Harris. In the glossary, there's a section right here regarding Peter. Just want to read the last sentence because it has a profound bearing on 2 Peter chapter 2, and whether it's even worth our time trying to figure out what Tartarus is. So I'm going to read. Although a minority of scholars regard him as the source of 1 Peter, virtually all experts deny Peteran authorship to the second epistle bearing his name. So let me just repeat this for emphasis. Although a minority of scholars regard him as the source of 1 Peter, virtually all experts deny Peteran authorship to the second epistle bearing his name. So if the scholars don't believe by far and large that Peter even wrote 2 Peter, then you really cannot take anything you find in 2 Peter with all seriousness. So let's just go ahead and read 2 Peter 2:4. Because in reality, in the Christian theology, this has to do with Noah's flood also. Certainly, if God did not hold back from punishing the angels that sinned, but by throwing them into Tartarus, delivered them to pits of dense darkness to be reserved for judgment. Verse 5, and he did not hold back from punishing an ancient world, but kept Noah, a preacher of righteousness, safe with 7 others. ... I want to put something into everybody's mind, their preview, for just the purpose of thought. Something to think about, because right here we are given to believe that the angels sinned. And you can find part of that sin, presumably, in Genesis chapter 6. Okay? Now we all know how the story goes, but I'm going to read it for emphasis. Genesis chapter 6, starting with verse 1. Now somebody might think that I'm taking this out of context, or I'm reading something into the context. I don't believe I am, because the writer, presumably Moses qualifies this in what we today would consider legal and binding terms. Genesis chapter 6, verse 1. Now it came about that when men started to grow in numbers on the surface of the ground, and daughters were born to them, then the sons of the true God, now bear in mind, the word true is inserted, so the sons of the true God began to notice the daughters of men, that they were good looking, and they went taking wives for themselves, namely all whom they chose. So presumably the sin is that these fallen angels began looking at the women and cohabitating with them. But for me, and for maybe a few of you friends, the problem arises in the terminology taking wives. We all know through Christian theology that, presumably Jehovah God performed the first marriage, brought Eve to Adam, and said a few words that ends with, what God has yoked together, let no man pull apart. So why is it that presumably Moses is writing about this sin of the fallen angels in legalistic terms, such as using the word wives? Even in today's society, that denotes a legal, binding, God-ordained union. Doesn't it, friends? So, when you look at it from that perspective, then truly, what is the sin? Because Moses, presumably, is writing this and he's using a legalistic term of what these angels had done. If these angels were so out of sync with God's arrangement, then why not just, divinely use their wicked power, do away with all the husbands, and then just have their wicked way with these women without benefit of marriage or a legalistic term such as taking wives? You just got to think a little bit, friends. You just have to think. But more to the point about this Tartarus being a pit of dense darkness, once again, I encourage you to go and watch what XJW Elder's wife, Jane Doe, has done, and in particular, pay attention to the Watchtower she's reading from and what's said in Wikipedia. Because there again, Satan is the leader of all these demons, and if these demons are in the pit of dense darkness, then who presumably is Satan leading? He can't be leading anybody if they're in a pit of dense darkness, but we know how Watchtower qualifies that. Well, it's not a real place, it's a condition. Oh, really, Watchtower? I want to draw your attention to Daniel chapter 10. Now, before I begin reading this, I want you friends to recall that in the book of Job, Satan has taken his position in heaven in the presence of the God of all light, Jehovah. He's right there. How could you even qualify Satan as being in a pit of dense darkness when he's standing before Jehovah? Kim and I just did a video showing in Zechariah chapter 3. Satan is at the right hand of Jehovah's angel. And if you take out what Watchtower inserted, and he's at the right hand of Jehovah, and even so, Jehovah is talking about sprout in front of Satan. So is he really in darkness? He's right in the presence of Jehovah as Jehovah is speaking about sprout. Okay, so it can't be a condition of spiritual unawareness, because Satan knows about Sprout. Daniel chapter 10. I want to start with verse 1 because it shows that this story is being written by someone else who is just writing something that Daniel wrote previously. Daniel chapter 10, verse 1. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, the king of Persia, there was a matter revealed to Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar. And the matter was true, and there was a great military service. And he understood the matter, and he had understanding in the thing seen. So there again, the past term was. Someone is writing this after Daniel's death, it appears, and backdated, so he has to qualify it as, revealed to Daniel. But see, then he just copies what presumably was written by Daniel, because in verse 2 it reads, "In those days I myself, Daniel, happened to be mourning for 3 full weeks." 21 days. Now, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you know precisely how this is going to go. If you're an ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who has joined another sect of Christianity, you also know where this is going. Okay? So the angel Gabriel has been assigned to deliver Daniel a message. So let's see what kind of happens here. Verse 13. But the prince of the royal realm of Persia was standing in opposition to me for 21 days. And look, Michael, one of the foremost princes, came to help me. And I, for my part, remained there beside the kings of Persia. Well, there is some question as to who the king of Persia is, but either way you look at it, this demon, this angel, this Satan, how is it that he could be in a pit of dense spiritual darkness if he knows enough to hold up this message to resist Gabriel from getting that message to Daniel? The only way any demon, any angel, any Satan would have known to hold up that message is if that angel, that Satan, that Satan, was in the know. Think about it. If these angels were delivered to spiritual darkness, then this angel would not have known the message that Gabriel was going to send and give to Daniel. There's something else interesting about this, because, and this is just a side point, if you go over to verse 5, this is Daniel presumably describing Gabriel. I also proceeded to raise my eyes and see, and there was a certain man clothed in linen, with his hips girded with gold of Uphaz. And his body was like chrysolite, and his face was like the appearance of lightning, and his eyes like fiery torches, and his arms and the place of his feet were like the sight of burnished copper. And the sound of his words was like the sound of a crowd. It's interesting to note that in the book of Ezekiel, Satan, the cherub, was also described in terms of chrysolite. Isn't it? Okay. But it's also interesting to ponder this. When it says, "In his feet were like the sight of burnished copper, and the sound of his words was like the sound of a crowd." If you go over to Revelation chapter 1. I find it interesting and noteworthy that some of the same terminology is applied to Jesus. Start with verse 12. And I turned to see the voice that was speaking with me. And having turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. And in the midst of the lampstand, someone like a son of man, clothed with a garment that reached down to the feet, and girded at the breast with a golden girdle. Golden girdle. Moreover, his head and his hair was white as wool, as snow, and his eyes as a fiery flame, and his feet were like fine copper. See, fine copper can also be termed as burnished copper. And his voice was the sound of many waters. Well, when you have many waters, especially if you're near a couple waterfalls, wouldn't it sound like crowds? Isn't it interesting to note that John is describing Jesus in similar terms as Daniel was describing Gabriel? Just something to think about when you want to pick up the Bible and read and try to understand the confusion of all of this. So anyhow, that's all I have to say about this subject. Do your research. Don't be afraid to think in critical terms. Don't be afraid to reach out to someone that's doing this type of work. Because when you really think about it, friends, none of the apologetics from Watchtower behind me or the apologetics in a Christian bookstore would not exist if it wasn't for the one book. And remember, the vast majority, better yet, let me just reread what I read earlier. Oh, virtually all experts deny Peter an authorship to the second epistle bearing his name. So you got to wonder, who wrote 2 Peter? What was the purpose of writing 2 Peter? Better yet, what was the purpose of putting those angels, the time of the flood, in Tartarus, when clearly the leader of them, the leader of those demons himself, Satan, is pictured in the same light as Jehovah, and he hears Jehovah's plans. He knew enough, or somebody knew enough, to block Gabriel, and yet Jehovah told in the presence of Satan, sprout in Zechariah. So thanks for watching, and please go over and listen to what Jane Doe is reading from the Watchtower magazine, because it really shows that Watchtower doesn't have a clue what they're trying to qualify here in 2 Peter 2:4. So you friends, have a great evening. Bye.